Debruyne, Coordinator of Opportunities, and I want to introduce you into our story, a story that tries to create a fair dialogue. What is opportunities? We start from the fact that we see a very toxic debate on migration, a toxic debate that has negative implications for European cohesion, but also for our European and humanitarian values. We see also that migrants are invisible. Their voice and aspirations are not heard. We want to create a balanced narrative on migration, and we think if we have a balanced narrative on migration, then you can see migration as an opportunity. What does that mean, a balanced narrative on migration? That means that the voices of migrants are on the same level as the others, and that means a level telling field. Level telling field is a metaphor that comes from the level playing field used in sports and economics, and where you see that everyone needs the same opportunity, the same chance to bring their story, their voice. We use the glossary, and in that glossary you'll find all our key terms and concepts about migration and narratives. So the goal of the level telling field is to enable migrants to take control of their own stories and share them in a public context if they are willing. So these stories are from them, and it's not stories that is imposed on them by media or other institutions. And so we try to contribute to a fair, more balanced, less polarized dialogue on the subject of migration. So what is the place of narratives in this fair dialogue? We learned a lot from the stories. First of all, we thought about how do narratives on migration develop? How are they used? What are the messages? How do they distract? How are they different? What is the difference between on and off migration? We compared articles in journals, Twitter messages, using fiction and non-fiction literature, using songs, proverbs, films, and also interviews from migrants himself. We see that in most cases, the concept of borders is central to the discourse of the right and the far right, while left-wing centrist politicians favor integration. But they all use discursive safety valves to stave off attacks from the other side. So right-wing, far-right politicians strive to avoid accusations of racism, while left-wing centrist politicians fear being represented as blindly believing in the benefits of immigration. But these concepts of borders, of integration, is used not only by politicians, but also by journalists, by NGOs and others. We learned from all the stories that narratives are not static but dynamic, and you can really make a distinction between event modeling, event management, purpose and chef, aggregation, normalization, realignment, redirection, multiple and competing narratives, and we can find even the distinction between centrifugal and centripetal effects of narratives. All those elements you can read on our website, the reports about that. We see also that there are different scales in the narratives, and that journalists but also NGOs, literature balance between an individual scale and a regional, national, African, even on a global scale. So stories are combined of different scales. We learned from the stories from the migrants itself that their stories are very cyclical and polyphonious. The point of departure is always culturally informed by narrative templates such as proverbs, which highlight a society's inclination to mobility and migration. The right to mobility is really a central point in the African stories. The mental map of Europe as the place of greener pastures fits well into this template. There are also counter-narratives of their experiences and first-hand accounts by migrants in transit. There we hear the stories of precarity. But these stories of precarity tend to be overshadowed, even left out, in favor of stories of arrival, and that's are the heroic stories. Heroic stories that come back to the home country, that inspire a new set of prospective young migrants that decide to take the risky journey to Europe. And we see also that there are three kinds of narratives. You had narratives on migration, narratives of migration, and between them the hybrid kinds of vicarious storytelling. Vicarious storytelling is where you speak with migrants and you try to liberate them from a passive role and try to tend to counter existing narrative patterns and templates. There are different forms of vicarious storytelling. You have case stories, documentary storytelling, ambassadorial storytelling, and allied storytelling. And you see that vicarious storytelling and social action comes together like in the crosstalks. In the crosstalks, that's a methodology where we try to use the stories with the help of the migrants to create a level-telling field of fair dialogue. And we start with creating narratives with the migrants based on their interviews. We let these stories we use them as in a reenactment phase, and that means that we ask others to read the stories of the migrants, and we create as such a shared narrative with migrants and stakeholders. From the reenactment, where I as a stakeholder must read a story of a migrant, I step in the shoes of that migrant and I have the conditions of creating conditions for a common ground between me and the migrant. And if we have a common ground between a migrant and myself, then we can begin with a fair dialogue between him, her, and myself. And that's my last slide. Storytelling is always something that demands listening. If your storytelling can't exist without someone who listens to. So storytelling demands always an ethic of listening. So kind of openness. And that openness creates a common ground between you and me. And that creates conditions for a fair dialogue. So storytelling is a very important tool to create openness between them and me. And this fair dialogue gives an opportunity to overcome the toxic dialogue and the defensive identity narratives. Thank you for listening.